Securing Your Business Through COVID-19, Part 3. So yeah, this is our third week in a row that we've been working through these topics, and there has been no shortage of questions and direction that people have needed on it because it was rolled out over the last few weeks, and with the biggest package piece being rolled out just 2 weeks ago. They voted on it on, I believe, the 27th, and then the big loan application process started last Friday, a little bit early. I mean, in my opinion, they weren't really ready to actually be providing loans. So just so you know, it's a constantly moving and shifting area for the banks and for the businesses and for those of us trying to give education on the topic. Okay, see if it will let me. There we go. So today I'm going to do a couple things a little differently. I'm going to start out by showing you a few of the resources and how to access them online, because the biggest piece of this has been keeping up to date. And so there are some online resources that we go to on a regular basis. And for me, I'm on it multiple times, definitely multiple times a week, sometimes multiple times a day, trying to get the information and see if it has been updated by the various agencies that are putting out the information. So, so I was just going to jump over and just show you some of those things today. We're going to talk a little bit about the Paycheck Protection Loan, how that rolls out for self-employed persons today. We're also going to talk about the economic injury disaster loans. For those of you on my Wednesday call, you realized I didn't remember what that stood for, and so now I actually know that, so that's good. We're going to talk about the updates on that, and that was the piece that people are considering, that $10,000 grant. And so we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what little we know on what's happening with the unemployment, the sick leave, and the Expanded Family Medical Leave Act in action. So that went into effect on April 1st, and we are starting to see our first round of people who are having to pay people using the guidelines under this act. We're going to talk about a couple of unique business situations and see what resources might be available for those. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about pivoting, purging, and pausing, and as relating to your business and what you should be thinking about in terms of those areas and what those mean to your business. All right, so what I'm going to jump into first, let me first look here, see how we're doing on getting some people in here. Yep, so we've got some people who have been able to access. There may be some issues with people with passwords. Try without a password if you're listening on Facebook and would prefer to actually be in the Zoom call. You can put comments in Facebook. Nicole's actually going to be behind the scenes she can answer those questions for you behind the scenes. And on Facebook, and then if you want to put anything in the chat or the Q&A fields here in Zoom, I can try to answer questions as we go with that as well. All right, so I'm going to jump over to my browser, and we're going to talk a little bit about what I have done to add some functionality for getting to my different, let's see, let me share that again. Hold on, got to work on my technology. Okay, we're going to look at that. And what I want to do is just show you which websites I am actually saving and how I am saving them. So I'm going to just jump over here to my browser. And here I am sitting on my Facebook page. I think I can get out of that. So if you're just on your main page, what I have done, I've set myself up some COVID-19 pages, and let me make sure I am actually sharing this, because I don't think I am. Here we go. I'm going to share that over to, who can share? Only the host. Get out of there. Okay, I think I'm sharing this. We should be seeing Google for me. So the pages that I have been sharing or using quite a bit. Obviously, we were using irs.gov before, but we are definitely using it a whole lot more to keep up to date with the legislation. That website is irs.gov. And on the very front page of this website is a link to Get Corona Tax Relief. And so what I have done here, you know, you can either come straight into here if you want to be on this page um, or you can just save irs.gov. And if you're using, let me go back, that's not gov. So we're on the main page because that's always right here in the top corner. If you wanted to bookmark this, I've done one thing where I have created a folder for all of my saved websites that I've been going to all the time. And to save that, you're just going to click, if you're using Google, you'll click on the star, you're going to name your site and you're going to tell it where you want to put it. If you don't have a folder created, you can create a folder by hitting the More button and put a new folder. So then when you go to save it, again, you can tell it you want it to go into your new COVID folder. And done. And so by doing this, you're starting a little folder on to your bookmarks bar that you can find things. And so here's my new COVID folder. It's actually a subfolder of my regular COVID folder. But in here, I have the websites for the irs.gov. That's going to give you the information on the economic impact payments. That's the $1,200 per adult and the $500 per kid based on 2018 or 2019, blah, blah, blah. That's going to give you that information. It is going to, then they've changed it this week. So now they have broken it down between information for your individuals, information for your businesses, and information for health plans and retirement plans. So I spend a lot of time in the more for business and more for individuals, but you may just be, you know, looking at things relating to your individual. When you go into the more for businesses, there's resources here on what's happening. No, I don't want to give any information on the various, you know, the paid leave, the retention credit, there's the filing tax deadline, all of those things. So that's my IRS site. So what I've done in my COVID folder, I have the IRS, I have the CDC. I tell everybody and I caution everybody at the beginning is go to the source. You know, go to the source of the place where they are putting out the information. Do not just go off media reports. Don't go off CNN or Fox News or any of those as your source. So if the CDC puts out some sort of mandate, you want to go to the CDC website and you want to look there and see what are their guidelines. You don't want to take that information from, you know, your local TV station or radio station. You want to take it from the source. So that's why we're going to irs.gov. That's why we are going to CDC. That's why we're going to the Department of the Treasury, which that website is home.treasury.gov. They also have all of the information and guidelines relating to the sick leave, the family medical leave, the expanded act there. They have information relating to unemployment and how those things are rolling out, as well as the PPP, Paycheck Protection Loan program, and frequently asked questions. So almost all of these websites will have something highlighted here where you can just click right on that and it's going to take you to, you know, something relating to the CARES Act, relating to Corona. You know, these are all links that, you know, I have reviewed at some point to figure out what's going on with the Paycheck Protection Loan. Also in my shortcuts, I have put the Department of Labor. They again are giving information on unemployment and the CARES or the sick leave and the expanded family medical leave. If you know, you can come straight in here when you start looking at these stories. The stories written for these websites, I take much more to heart than those written by a news source. So, you know, when I'm coming in here for information about the paid leave, I can trust that this article was written by somebody who has the information and the guidelines that we're supposed to be following. My other sites include the Missouri Labor, which it's called Missouri Labor here. This is your unemployment site. You come in here and you have, you know, a site for employers, unemployed people. There are frequently asked questions. There's obviously going to be information here relating to COVID-19. So COVID-19 FAQs for businesses and workers. This is a major source of information. I scroll down here and I see it has not been updated since the 8th. So we are still awaiting guidance, but I come in and check when was the last time it was updated. And then I also hop over to under the unemployment information tab is where when you scroll down here, it will start your questions and answers. And this answers so much in relation to all of the new rules that have come out. And it also tells you things like, hey, we're waiting for guidance, you know, so you may have a question, you know, how does someone who is self-employed get unemployment? It's still it's still waiting. We are waiting. So I think that's question number 7. So yes, you can get it. They're waiting for specific documentation from the Department of Labor in order to flesh out how this is actually going to work. Okay, so I'm going to jump over to see if anybody has any questions or issues yet in chat. So there's always so many new things over here and I never really know how to get to all of them when I'm sharing my screen. So you just kind of have to bear with me a little bit. Maybe I have to stop share to do that. I'm not sure. Okay, so that's what I'm doing. Like I said, you can take any one of these websites, this specific page if you wanted to, and turn it into a bookmark. I'm going to put it into my COVID-19 and click done. And now when I go to this folder, I have come directly to this page and don't have to navigate anywhere else. So if you're waiting for some guidance on things, frequently asked questions, I highly suggest finding these websites. DOL.gov is Department of Labor. Like I said, treasury.gov is home.treasury.gov, irs.gov, and just making some bookmarks for those. Okay. Let's get back over to my sharing and come over to back to my slides. Okay. Did that do it? Come on. There we go. Okay. All right. So the next thing we're going to talk about is the Paycheck Protection Loan Update. So this was rolled out with the CARES Act 2 weeks ago. Last Friday, they opened up the application process for businesses that had employees. I will just tell you, it was anything but a smooth process. Most of the banks are working round the clock to kind of figure this out. And unfortunately, they are absolutely having to figure it out as there is not 100% guidance from any, you know, of the Department of Treasury or the SBA or anybody that they can follow. So there has been guidelines that have been updated since last Friday that has made some clarifications. There have been some follow-up emails from some banks on needing specific codes or specific start dates of a business. There's a lot of kind of crazy information out there. Some banks are requiring that you already have a pre-existing account with them. Some are requiring that you have a certain type of pre-existing account, you know, that you have a business bank account or you already have some sort of loan or line of credit with them. There are some banks that we're just not doing them. Some banks are referring you to a third party. My bank has finally gotten back to me, but it's been a little, it's been a tough battle. I still have not put an application in because it's just a little bit of phone tag. It's oh yeah, just email us your information. I said, well, you know, it's unsecure. It's, do you have a secure portal I can upload to, or can you download from my secure portal? Because the information includes social security numbers and oh, you can email it or fax it to us. Wow, no. So it's been elevated over to a lender. I'm not sure what the process is, but just know that your banks if they're participating in it, they are trying to make this work for you. What I would suggest is if you've put in an application since last Friday, then I would check in with your bank. Hopefully you are working specifically with a banker on this, but if you are not, you need to try to track down who you need to be talking to directly to find out what the status is. I get updates in particular from one bank here in town because I have several customers with that bank, and I'm included on his email blasts. And so his answer today was they should be funding by Monday, and that they're working around the clock to get these things in line and ready to go and follow-up questions answered. So I have read from other sources that the banks are funding. I would say the smaller, more local regional banks are funding faster than some of the larger banks. So if you're with a, um, you know, big banks like national banks, Bank of America, Wells Fargo, Chase, that might take a little bit longer than if you're with more of a local bank here. Commerce, I would say, is kind of a mid-market bank. Their track record for dealing with small business isn't always great. And so they may also be putting in some additional hoops for you to be hopping through in order to actually get the loan. So the process of getting like the information out, all the banks were asking for something different. So if you have not yet applied, ignore everything you see on Department of Treasury's website and just go to the bank and say, send me your version of the application and what backup you need. Because the banks are really setting their own criteria in that, and you want to follow their guidelines as much as possible, even if they're straying from the guidance from the Department of Treasury, because ultimately the bank is the one that's doing the underwriting. And so if their underwriters are requiring a certain amount of information, then you're going to want to comply with that upfront as much as you possibly can, so there's fewer follow-up questions. So I've gotten a little more information on the self-employed process. It's still very, very fluid. There's not any guidance from the Department of Treasury yet. As you know, they've put out guidance relating to the employers with employees very well. In fact, they've cleared up a lot of issues. They haven't had any additional guidance, knowing that the people who are self-employed, the application process opens today, so April 10th. What I would suggest to you, if you are considering opening this, contact your bank. A lot of the banks are actually working today, even though sometimes they are closed on Good Friday, I believe. So you might want to go ahead and contact your bank. And if you have a specific banker, get them an email, find out what the status is, and see if they have any specifics of what they want. The overall consensus and interpretation of the rules for how an individual who is self-employed can apply for this loan is what I've stated here, is that if your 2019 tax return has been filed and you filed a Schedule C, you'll be calculating your average monthly payroll based on the net income shown on the Schedule C. So net income is the revenues minus your expenses, and it comes down to a number. You will then get to multiply that by 2.5 to get to your maximum loan funding. So I put an example here. If you had a net income of $48,000 listed on the Schedule C for 2019, you divide that by 12, that equals $4,000 a month, times 2.5, $10,000 max. This whole loan is always limited to an employee's wages of $100,000. So that means for a self-employed person, if you had net income of higher than $100,000, you are going to be limiting that to the $100,000, and your maximum loan is only going to be $20,833.33 for you to get the max. There's the guidance. If your 2019 has been filed, this is what I suggest that you do. It brings up some issues. What if you have a loss for 2019? Now, that's a problem because if you already have a loss, how can you prove that COVID-19 created more of a loss for you? That's going to be difficult. The other issue is, what if you haven't filed your 2019 return yet? If it's not done, the suggestion is, and the guidelines that are out there relating to self-employed persons, is that you can use the gross number from your 1099 miscellaneous. So if you received 2019 1099 miscellaneouses, and that's a gross number, you're not subtracting any expenses, still limiting it to the 100,000, then you may be able to use that as, and the guidance says that you could. The other thing that you could use is if you're keeping track of all of your income and expenses in a software like QuickBooks Online, then you could provide a 2019 financial statement that looks realistic, that's showing your income and your expenses. At that point, I would say the bank is going to look at your net income. So overall, you kind of needed to look at your net income, because that really is what your profit and your take-home pay is from a self-employed business. So realize if you had a very low income in 2019, your maximum loan amount for the Paycheck Protection Loan might be fairly small. It may not be worth the effort. The other issue that we don't know and have zero guidance on is what expenses, what portion of this for a self-employed person is going to be considered forgiven. And part of this situation is so that you can, the whole reason for the Paycheck Protection Loan is that you can preserve jobs and keep working, keep people working. And so this would imply that they're going to look back to the same time period that people with employees are looking at, which is March 2019 through June of 2019, I believe, to see if you are staying in line with that same level of income. So what happens when you have, if you had a huge summer or huge spring last year, and there's no way right now you can replicate that even with this loan, because it still involves you having to come up with a profit in these first 8 weeks in order to have something forgiven, I believe. It's really, we've got a calculation. I'm going to tell you, you need to contact your bank. Every bank still has its own set of requirements. And they're going to be clueless, but at least, you know, I can give you some guidelines on what they could or should be asking you for. The forgiveness piece is completely up in the air, and I have no idea. You know, if you can't prove that you made a profit, you may end up being on the hook for your entire loan. That's an 18-month loan with a 1% interest, with no payments for the first 6 months. Additionally, I've heard that people have gotten approved. Once you've been approved and you have signed your promissory note, the banks are now required to distribute that money within 10 days. So as soon as you receive that money, your 8-week window starts for the expenses that are going to be forgiven. So the 10 days they have to fund it within 10 days. That has created some issues with some businesses that said, hey, I'm still under a stay-at-home order. I am a non-essential business and I can't reopen my doors. How can I rehire my employees if I can't have some place for them to work? Yeah, that's a problem. So originally, I think some of the bankers thought, okay, we can just hold off. We won't fund this loan until the stay-at-home order is lifted, and therefore we would be able to not start that 8-week time clock until then. But the Treasury guidelines have definitely said 10 days, it has to be funded within 10 days of approval. Some are funding faster than that. So they've signed the promissory note. You may have money, you know, much quicker. The guidelines for the forgiveness have been, they haven't changed much since we talked last week. The general guidelines are that of the money that you receive, you need to use at least 75% of it towards payroll costs in the first 8 weeks, and 25% or less of it that would be used for rent, mortgage, utilities, or qualified expenses. That would need to be paid out in the first 8 weeks. I've had some questions come up. So, you know, the way our pay periods fall, that's not going to really work so well. Should we move our payroll date? Possibly. If you're really intent on getting some of this forgiven. The guidelines on how it's going to be forgiven is going to go through your bank. So you are going to be expected to provide them with documentation and proof that you paid these qualified expenses sometime during this 8-week period that starts on the date you get your installment from the bank. So when they fund it, that starts your 8-week period. The goal is rehire the people that were on unemployment, get your people back in and keep paying them. And sometimes that's going to be a difficult situation. There's nobody to sell to. So, you know, if you are a brick and mortar store and you are not allowed to be open, then that becomes a real challenge. So these are the things that, you know, there's probably going to be some guidelines that come out later that may shift some of this around, realizing too quickly, and they actually need to make some adjustments to it, but we don't know. But for all intents and purposes, if you got $100,000 and you can, you spend enough in the first, you say you spend 80,000 of it in the first 8 weeks on qualified expenses, you would end up with a loan for $20,000 that you would need to pay back in the next 18 months, with payments not having to start for another 6 months. The remainder that's been forgiven is not taxable to you. And my recommendation is that you set up an other income account on your chart of accounts. And when the forgiveness portion has been established, you're going to take that off of the loan balance and move it into this other income. And I'm guessing that the tax returns, you're going to leave it off of your tax return in whichever way you file. If you're a Schedule C, it won't be on there. If you're a pass-through entity, then there's going to be some place to leave that off. So, and then I've also seen some people suggesting that you set up a separate bank account for this. The only thing I can say relating to this is, unless you end up having to go to a bank that is not your current bank, then you may end up having to set up a bank account with that bank. Otherwise, there is absolutely no need to suddenly create a bank account and have to pay payroll expenses out of it and set up your direct deposits and all those things. No, that's a myth. Don't do it. I would say, if people are suggesting that, that is people who may not be using a good accounting system of some sort, or someone helping them, guide them through how to keep track of all this. Back to my self-employed people with the PPP loans. One thing that has come up is that some people, when they set up their business, did not set up a business bank account. They were using a personal bank account and running their business income through that. Some banks, even though it is not something that legally they are probably required to do, they're putting up some roadblocks there and say, yeah, without a business bank account, we're not doing this. And I don't know if that's for liability purposes for them or whatever. But you should be considering that, if you just have a personal account and you never set up a separate bank account, you may run into some roadblocks. So just be aware. And that's why I say call your banker for sure if you're self-employed. Okay. All right. So that's our PPP update. We're going to move on to the EIDL loans, which is the economic injury disaster loans. So these are the ones that everybody jumped on the SBA website and started filing right away. Every state in the country is considered a disaster zone and is eligible. These are designed to give small businesses the ability to get some cash without going through the much longer SBA process. What I've been seeing and reading is that they're running about 2 to 3 weeks behind from the application date. So some people started filing for these before around the last week of March. I filed for ours on March 30th, which was Monday. And that was when the short application, in my world, the short application came through. And that is where you were able to indicate if you wanted to put in your bank account information to apply for the $10,000 grant, which is money that would not need to be repaid. So they are running behind. They are kind of working through the mid-March applications now. They will notify you by the email address you put into the application. If you put in the application prior to them having the ability to check the box and ask for the $10,000 grant specifically, you may want to go back and do that again. Go in and do the short application. So if you sent in a whole bunch of stuff, or it took you hours to fill out that application, you probably may want to go in and do the short one. And that's right on the SBA website. What I heard was that if your confirmation number starts with a 3, you're good. If it started with a 2, you probably need to resubmit, but don't hold me to that. But so just check your confirmation number. If you did it early on, say the second or third week of March, The ones that I did on March 30th were definitely, they had a code that started with a 3. For self-employed persons, this is an option, a little bit easier, as you are not necessarily having to come up with all that payroll information. It's asking for revenue minus gross, minus cost of goods sold. So it's asking for those two numbers. It's also asking for the number of employees. And what I have heard, seen, cannot get an answer to right now is that $10,000 is based on the number of employees at $1,000 per employee. I don't know if that's legit or not, but that would, if somebody's coming back and saying, oh, they gave me $3,000 because I put in I said I had 3 employees on January 31st. They're only giving me $3,000. I don't know if that's legitimate or not. I cannot find that on the SBA website to support that. So that, because it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because then obviously it's capped at 10 employees, and there's going to be a lot of small businesses with more than 10 employees that will qualify for these loans. So again, it's completely fluid. We're completely getting information from various sources. I was not able to support that on the SBA website. You will be getting if you applied, you'll get an email from SBA .gov. I believe it's disaster loan or something at sba.gov. Make sure you're checking your junk mail, your spam, because when you get that email, you want to respond. You're going to go in, you're going to set up an account, you're going to put in your confirmation number and finish that process, so that will start the 3-day window for getting your $10,000. It also will start the process for you applying for the rest of that loan. So if there's loans, I think it's $200,000 or less, there's no personal guarantee needed at all. The loans can go up to $2 million. They're considered for operating expenses, essentially. But you can't use the funds for the same thing that you use a PPP loan for. So if you're primarily using PPP to fund payroll, you're going to be using the loan from the economic injury disaster loan for other things. So that's to keep your vendors paid, to pay the other things to keep your business running. You can use it for rent, that type of thing. If it's forgiven, and it can be used longer than 8 weeks. Obviously, you don't have this 8-week forgiveness period. That $10,000, you don't have to repay. The rest of it, they start paying, I believe, in 12 months, but the interest starts accruing immediately. Everything I've read says you'll be assigned a loan officer. They're going to contact you by email first. So you want to be checking that email account that you used on the application frequently and respond quickly to keep that process rolling. All right, so I'm going to jump out and just check and see if anybody's had any questions. Okay. So yeah, so Deb's asking about the Illinois unemployment. Yeah, you're probably looking at Illinois Department of Labor or some such website. Becky wants to know, are self-employed people able to get family leave because of children not having school and unemployment? That's a big question, because the issues we're seeing there are, so if you're getting the family medical leave, that is really paid for a self-employed person. That is true, will be trued up at the end of 2020. But that means you have to be able to have paid yourself, which means you need to have been able to make a profit. And I think that's kind of yet to be seen on how that is really going to work. As far as, and can you get unemployment? Well, that's going to be a big question with the self-employed people getting unemployment is, if you're still working, how are you allowed to get unemployment? So you can't do both things. And so what is being said, if you take it from the standpoint of the, how they're handling it for a true employee of an employer, is that no, you can't get paid sick leave for the same time period that you're getting unemployment, because paid sick leave means you're still employed, and unemployment means you no longer have a job. So you don't So they're kind of saying, hey, if you're getting paid sick leave, you can't double dip. So I think it's going to be an either or in some of these situations. Okay, so that looks like all the questions I have there. All right, I'm gonna hop back over to my slides. All right. Okay, unemployment. So it's a good segue. Thanks, Becky. This is the hot topic that is, we're still awaiting guidance. It has been the slowest thing for the Department of Labor to trickle down their guidance to the states. Some states are rolling it out faster than others. Missouri, I still don't see any true guidance, although their site was down overnight last night. So that, I don't know if that means that they updated the application, and I can't test it. So I'm not unemployed at this point, and so I can't go in and start a claim, which is exactly what you need to do if as any, either losing your job or if you're self-employed, you're going to start a claim. So I can't tell. So I'm just gonna have to say, hey, if you're self-employed, go try it, see if anything's changed. What you're really looking at, again, is going to be figuring out how much income you had over a certain time period. So you're probably going to have to be looking back at to determine how much money they're going to give you. And is that going to be based on 2019, or is it going to be based on the first quarter of 2020? I don't know. You want it to be based on 2019 because that's presumably when you were making more money than you were in this first quarter of the year, possibly. So, so it's still, we're awaiting guidance, which means if you're self-employed, hop on and try to file a claim. That would be my suggestion, because I can't see if they updated the application. I'm going to push this button and hopefully I don't lose you all. No, see, that won't let me do it. I was going to try to look at chat without, and I can't seem to look at my chat with my screen shared. So let me stop that share real quick. I just want to see if somebody has. Okay, so Becky says she tried this morning and says it still asks who your last employer was, you, and what your wage was. So if it's asking what is the time frame of what that wage was, like so if it was last week, last quarter, what I don't know because I haven't seen it, but you're going to list yourself as the employer, would be my recommendation. And then what your last wage was, if it depends on the time period. So if it's asking what your weekly wage was, monthly wage, we could go back to your Schedule C, and you could take that. And so if you had, you made $20,000 on your Schedule C last year in profit, and you divide that by whatever time period they're asking for, or they ask for weeks, divided by 52. That's going to be what your weekly income would be. If they're asking for a month, divided by 12. So, and see how far that gets. Although I will tell you, they still say you're falling under the Pandemic Act unemployment or something, PAU, and they're waiting guidance. They thought the guidance would be out this week, which means maybe it will be out over the weekend. That was the last time that they put an update out there. So, so yeah, it's tricky. And what's really tricky about the self-employed people is they kind of indicate, yep, you're going to get some relief, but they've been the slowest in figuring out how those people are going to get any relief. Because you really are in a situation where you can't really double dip. So I would say if you think you're going to file unemployment because you actually have no income, say you had a business that is one-on-one contact, that's how you got your all of your income, and all of that has been shut down and for the foreseeable future, or at least for the rest of this month, and with schools being closed until now the end of May as well, that I would say you are probably better off filing for unemployment than you are for getting a PPP loan. So the PPP loan has an expectation that you're going to be able to keep working and keep making a profit and keep benefiting the economy. And there's, if your business is completely one-on-one work, you're shut down and you're not allowed to go anywhere, or your kids are at home and you can't work anyway, then you're looking at probably needing to file for unemployment, and taking advantage of that extra $600 a week that is starting to come out. They said as of March 29th, they will make it retroactive to March 29th. And people who already have a current claim should start seeing that additional $600 starting next week. And they're saying the $600 will be retroactive for the self-employed people. So it's really, really tricky right now to figure out what a self-employed person should do. Multiple facets of it, because not working in your business, what happens when this is over, and has all your work dried up and you're starting over, that would be so terrible. And so it's like, you need to keep working. And so what I think will happen is that there's going to be some sort of reporting process for unemployment for those people, showing how much money they have brought in each week. And that may reduce how much you get from unemployment at that time. But it's hard. Like I said, they will have to put guidance out on that to see how that's really going to work. But at least we are getting to the point where we're able to say, okay, yeah, it's coming. They know it's coming. I think the bigger question for so many of my self-employed people are, do I get a loan? Do I take unemployment? And those two things can't necessarily live together. You can't necessarily collect unemployment and get a loan that says you're going to keep your payroll going. Those two things they're not compatible with the way the rules are right now. So if you have a business where face-to-face contact is not that big of a deal, you're working from home, you work remotely, you always have. Yes, maybe your work has slowed down because, some of the bigger companies have slowed down, but you still have work. I would say you're looking more at a PPP and not an unemployment situation, or an SBA loan and not an unemployment situation. Unemployment, it is taxable. They will allow you to withhold federal tax, but there's no place to withhold state tax from it. So just so you know, it is a taxable event. Some of these loans, obviously, they're giving grants or forgiveness that is not going to be taxable to you, but it's still a loan, and you will still need the cash flow going forward to pay it off. So if it's all not forgiven, it's an EIDL where only 10,000 is forgiven, and you get another 25 from them to work on operations and keeping things going, then that 25 is, you still got to be able to pay that back and have the cash flow to do it going forward. The payroll forgiveness, or the paycheck protection loan, it has a short window where it says, yeah, if you want it forgiven, you're going to have to use it, and you need to use it for the purposes we want you to use it for. And for some people, that's not going to be a realistic situation for where their company is. It takes time to get people back in place. It takes, if you are still under a shutdown, non-essential business, you can't open anyway. So what happens when you get that PPP and you need to pay people, but you can't, you don't have any place for them to work. So it's definitely a situation that has got a lot of issues going on with it, but at least we're a little bit further than we were last week, but I would say it is slow go on what to do with self-employed people. Okay, let's see what's next. All right. Okay, the FFCRA Law Act, which was the sick leave and expanded family medical leave, it's in action. So let me just tell you, so we already have some of our clients that it applies to, where they're either having to begin paying people for staying home with their children, or they have people bringing in doctor's notes, and we have to figure out, does this apply or does it not? So it's becoming a little crazy. And what I will share with you is that I think it's probably important that you're familiar with the criteria that someone can use to actually get qualified for the sick leave. So I grabbed this This is from Department of Labor, and hopefully you guys can all see this. And it outlines the 6 criteria for someone being able to get paid for sick time, or and then for people who are staying home with their kids, they get the expanded family medical leave. The first one, I can make this a little bigger, is excuse me, is subject to a federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order related to COVID-19. And this is saying under the FFCRA, an employee qualifies for paid sick time if the employee is unable to work due to a need for leave because the employee is subject to federal, state, or local quarantine or isolation order. This is related to actually being sick or being suspected of being sick. This isn't it's shut down and I can't come to work. That is not that. 2 is the employee has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine related to COVID-19 because the employee is experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. 4 is the employee is caring for an individual subject to an order described in 1, which is they're required to be quarantined or isolation order related to COVID-19, or they are, is caring for an individual subject to an order described in 1, or self-quarantine as described in 2. So that's for somebody who's caring for somebody. That's 2/3 pay. It's not full pay. The 5th reason is you're caring for a child whose school is closed. And the 6th reason is the employee is experiencing any other substantially similar condition specified by the Secretary of Health and Human Services in consultation with Secretary of Labor and Treasury. Wow, that's pretty broad. So in the first 3 instances, that is the employee that is sick themselves. And in 4, 5, and 6, you're caring for someone. So 4, 5, and 6 is relating to 2/3 pay. 1, 2, and 3 is relating to regular rate of pay for the employee. Here's the questions that are coming up. So they're sick, they don't feel good, they go to the doctor gives them a diagnosis that is not COVID-19, but says they're going to follow the CDC guidelines and you don't need to come back. They're suggesting you don't come back to work till a specific date. Is that person subject to sick leave? Well, there's guidelines that say, if it's not COVID-19, then it's not really, you don't fall into any of these. You've already gotten a diagnosis and it's not COVID-19. If the healthcare provider actually says to self-quarantine in their diagnosis, then yeah, I guess that would be required. If the person is choosing to self-quarantine, then it is very difficult. Let me just tell you. But back to your regular employee, who gets a cold and says, I'm sick and can't come to work. If you don't have a sick leave policy, that doesn't mean you automatically have to have use this sick pay through the FFCRA rule. So it has to fall into one of these 6 guidelines before you are required to do it. If you have fewer than 500 employees, you're required to do it. So yeah, you want to kind of start to get a little familiar with this, and you want to make sure you're getting the documentation from your employees. They really, really, really need to give you some definition of what is going on. And if the doctor doesn't specifically say, then it's getting a little suspect. So what you don't want is your employees all saying, I don't feel good, I'm still going to go home and get paid. However, as an employer, I look at the risk of having that person that has a cold, a sinusitis, having them come into the workplace because I'm still open, and what happens if there's also someone in the workplace who is kind of immune compromised, who could get something really easily. They shouldn't come to work if they're sick. Should they get paid is a different question. It's kind of up to the employer at this point. You do have to follow it though. So if they give you a note that says, I'm waiting for a diagnosis on whether or not it's COVID-19, you're paying them until they get that diagnosis. If they come in and they say, I've been quarantined because I was exposed to someone who had it, then they have a note that says they're quarantined. You have to, but then you have to comply. So. Okay, so let me see what other questions, if there's anything relating to this. So the second option, I believe on that was relating to whether or not they have symptoms. So number 2, has been advised by a healthcare provider to self-quarantine. That one, if a healthcare provider if they've done some sort of, consultation with a doctor somewhere and they need to get something from that doctor that says they've been advised to self-quarantine. The doctor's offices need to start using this specific language. And as an employer, I would suggest that you're okay with that employee to go back and say, I need it clearer. You need to go back to your healthcare provider and find out, does this fall into this? For multiple reasons. And it's not because I don't want people to get paid because of this. It's because there are so many tax related implications of this. So if you pay somebody through this, you don't get that forgiven with your PPP money. If you pay somebody through this, you have some actual, payroll related issues you need to deal with now. You're going to be deducting things from your payroll taxes. You're going to have some sort of reconciliation on your 941, and all those things, your payroll provider needs to know, and it needs to all be accounted for properly. So I think the third one, the experiencing COVID-19 symptoms and is seeking a medical diagnosis. So which symptoms? There are a lot out there. There are some that are highly ranked compared to others. A sore throat is a symptom of a lot of things. It doesn't necessarily mean it's a symptom of COVID-19. So how long does it take them to get their medical diagnosis? Hopefully not very long, but I don't know. So you guys, it's kind of, it's not clear. I mean, it's going to be one of those things that as an employer, my recommendation is that you are getting as many facts from that employee as possible. You are making sure, when they call you and say, I'm sick, that they have a very specific doctor's note that says they're quarantined or in isolation. They have been advised by their healthcare provider to self-quarantine, or they're waiting their medical diagnosis. And then that same situation applies to the caregiver. So your 17-year-old child gets ill and it needs to be self-quarantined, and you're there to take care of them. Okay. But you need documentation showing that their doctor said that your daughter needed to be self-quarantined. So you need to just cover your bases as much as possible, because there are so many pieces to this that we want to try to get it right. And let me tell you, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard to get it right. They should get, so Beth another Beth, not me, is suggesting that they should get a signed recommendation from their doctor. Should they? Yeah, the doctor needs to clearly answer these questions. If they're going to bother to get a doctor's note and they think they want to get paid, they need to be able to tell their doctor to put this language in here, that they need to say, that the doctor has advised them to self-quarantine related to COVID-19. So obviously, if they have been diagnosed with COVID-19, then they're going to have some sort of diagnosis that they can provide to you, or doctors, unfortunately, that's where we're at on this one. So, okay, so I have a question from Tony relating to this issue, which is, if an employee's pay is partially covered under FFCRA, do you know yet how it will affect the forgiveness of the PPP money granted? So there will be no forgiveness of that if you take the payroll tax credit on it. The purpose of the FFCRA was so that a small business could still pay their sick person. They take what they paid them and deduct it off of their 941 taxes. That's really oversimplifying, so that there's kind of a wash that it's not really any cash out of their pocket. But if you do that, then any of those payroll items that were used to pay FFCRA, that actually is money that cannot be forgiven by the PPP because you've already taken a tax credit and it really wasn't out of your pocket anymore. So there was nothing to be forgiven. So I think that should answer your question. And that will take us back to our slides that give us some more direction on what's happening here. Is that there's a new tax table in QuickBooks. So if you haven't run a payroll tax update and you run payroll out of QuickBooks, please make sure that you do a payroll tax update before you process your payroll. There are going to be some separate payroll items and tax items, and probably some chart of account additions to your chart of accounts that all need to be accounted for and put in before you pay anybody on this, because it's going to become really critical that we have a good accounting of what is being paid under these types of required sick leave and EFMLA. So there's going to be a calculation on what 941 taxes are getting paid each time you have to pay them. There's you can offset the pay against some, but not all. You are still going to withhold retirement benefits or health insurance benefits out of their pay. So that is, it's not a special type of pay that wouldn't have that withheld. There's also some caps. So people cannot get paid more than a maximum per day. And then I believe there's a cap of $10,000 per person. Don't hold me to that one. I don't think it's $10,000 overall. I think but I think it's a per person, and Nicole may be able to better steer me on that one. So, so yeah, there are a lot of moving parts in this. And I think I say that about every single thing that we talk about, you know, so from unemployment to the PPPs to this, there's so many moving parts. We are trying to keep up to speed as quickly as we can. And like I said, we are starting to implement. So we have got some clients that are, you know, in a situation where they need to start paying these people. They need to know how to calculate their taxes. And so we are definitely working on it. All right, so I've had a few questions come up relating to some unique business situations. One of them, and it applies to several of my clients who actually own the building that they operate out of, but they own it under a separate entity. That entity typically does not have any payroll. Could be a partnership, could be an S corp, but it definitely is not in a situation where it would qualify for a PPP loan, because that is definitely payroll based. My suggestion there is that you would apply for that EIDL with or without the $10,000 grant. That's going to be dependent on if that $10,000 grant truly is based on number of employees. Like I said, that is unconfirmed information that I had in the source and cannot get it confirmed, but I'm going to try to, because that affects so many people. You were expecting 10,000 and you only get 2 because you only had 2 employees. That's huge. So, the PPP loan you wouldn't be able to apply for because you don't have any payroll expense. If you are, yeah, I think so. What my suggestion here is to make sure your operating company, that typically is the tenant, make sure that they are using their PPP proceeds to pay their rent, so that way they get that piece forgiven. And I think if you have other tenants outside of yourself, where you have a location where you have multiple units and so you're renting to other people, if they are actually trying to get a PPP loan, then they would be incentivized in some ways to actually pay their rent, because that's a piece that will be forgiven. So your management company may end up okay in this. It may not. So I would also suggest going to the SBA, look at that economic injury disaster loan. So it doesn't roll off the tongue, but at least I know what it stands for now. So that's definitely a situation where it's a little unique. So Okay, so I'm going to jump down. So there's a couple other questions that have come up that there's so little guidance out there. Um, what happens if you're already showing a recent loss from your business and everything is looking for, either this year or 2019 as far as what they're using for your numbers to fund any loans? If you were already losing money prior to COVID-19, how are you going to prove that COVID-19 impacted you? I don't know. That's my answer on that one. But know that that could be a hurdle for getting any of these funds. Um, the other situation on that is if you were in business and you were kind of running that edge of you're just kind of taking this as a little bit of a tax write-off, I would say leave it alone. Unless you're in jeopardy of not being able to pay the mortgage on your building or whatever, I don't go out and borrow a bunch of money just because it's free money. It's going to put you in a situation where you're going to spend a lot of time trying to prove you're a legitimate business and not that you're running a loss all the time. So other question that keeps coming up, if you started your business at the beginning of this year, how can you prove an impact from COVID-19? One, proving the impact has not actually become a question that anybody has had to answer on how has it impacted you. I'm not saying that it's not going to come up, and it could come up in an unemployment application where it says, okay, if you're self-employed, how is this impacted? Why are you suddenly claiming unemployment? Well, because I lost all these clients, or I couldn't go to these places, or whatever. You're going to have an explanation. You are certifying when you file for a PPP loan that you have been impacted. It's not asking you how. And the overall consensus is that everybody's going to be impacted, at some level. Some, already, it's already there. You're already at the bottom. Some, it's not going to come till the end of the summer as things are, yep, we're back in business, but people have changed how they're spending. They've changed their business plan. They've changed a lot, they're impacted by, customers that are no longer in business, and now they have less income. So there's going to be a rolling impact from this. And so I would say everybody's going to be impacted. I still say, don't run out and apply for all the money if you don't need to yet. Some of these loans are going to stay open. At the SBA loans, you can apply till the end of the year. So, if you're not in a position that it's an issue, maybe you wait. I don't know. I mean, I know from my perspective what we need to do, but every single situation is different. So I just, use your judgment, use us as a sounding board on should you or should you not. But every situation is going to be different. Okay, so one of the last things I wanted to talk about is this overall concept of what everybody needs to be thinking about in their business right now. We're in a time of great uncertainty still, and we will continue to be there for a while. And so I have been working with a person or a company really that, her name's Amy Porterfield, and she teaches things about creating digital courses going online. She teaches things about list building and email marketing. And so I'm in a membership group with her. And this week she really talked to the membership group about some things that every business owner should be looking at right now as far as what should you be doing. And the first thing, and I've talked about this last week, was pivot. What can you be doing? And you're seeing people pivot to things like curbside pickup. You can't come in my store, but I can definitely bring it to your car. You've seen people pivoting to, hey, I can still do coaching with you, but we need to do it virtually instead of in person. Financial planners that have a calendar full of one-on-one meetings are now doing those virtually and teaching their clients how to navigate the tech so that they can actually still be making some decisions on their accounts and those types of things. So you really need to look at every piece of your business and where your revenues come from and what can you pivot to right now that might be able to generate some revenue that you never had to put in place before because you were never in this situation. So pivoting becomes essential, and it's going to be one of those things that is going to get some of these people and these clients in your business through this economic downturn. And I'm going to say not just because of COVID, but we were thinking that there's going to be an economic downturn coming anyway. So, so you really need to think about pivoting. The second one is to purge. What can you get rid of? What was draining you of time or energy or money prior to COVID-19? Did you have somebody on your team that you're like, yeah, it's really not a good fit? Well, it's time to get rid of them. Was there are there things that are automatically hitting your credit card every month and you're like, oh, I really don't use that anymore. But in the past, you're so busy, you don't have time to stop and say, oh, let me cancel those things. Start thinking about things from a business perspective of things you can purge from your business. Maybe it's just things like your mindset. I need to purge negativity. I need to purge the I can't do this mentality, any of those things. So just start thinking about things, not just monetarily, but in your business that you can purge. Maybe there's some process or system in place that you have hated and have always hated. And it's like, okay, it's time to just, cut the cord and let's stop doing that. And then the third thing is what things you can pause. If you can no longer go into your business right now and you have utilities that you can set at higher levels so that you're not, running the air conditioning or the heat, it depends on the day here. Can you pause your trash pickup? Can you pause your, any of your services? So we have somebody that comes and empties our shred boxes. Well, there's nobody there to shred it. There's no papers being put in these boxes. Could we pause that? So you want to look through your list of things that you spend money on and what things can you just pause for now? You're not stopping forever, but you're looking at ways to increase that cash flow by saying, let's spend less money on this right now. Maybe there's some memberships, maybe there's some subscriptions, maybe there's just various services that you're paying for on a minimum basis, just in case you need it. And right now you definitely don't need it. So let's pause that and say, we'll re-up for that when things turn around. So those are my ideas for starting to think about things inside your business outside of just these dang tax laws. So that just start thinking about those things and hopefully that can put some perspective and some on how you're going to get through everything. All right, I'm going to jump in here real quick to see what I have in the Q&A, and then we're going to wrap this up. A question on, I believe this is relating to the FFCRA. Can your employees work on certain days and use other days for sick leave pay? So for caring for someone, yes. For them being sick themselves, no. Obviously, if they're quarantined or have COVID, they shouldn't be working at all. If they are able to work remotely, then that is going to definitely be up to the employer. So they are leaving some flexibility with the employers. If it's somebody that's working from home or is kind of exchanging days with their spouse for taking care of the kids, or they have options on some days but not others, then yes, you can pay them through the FFCRA for some days and not others. The only ones that are restricted, the sick leave has to be a whole day. You can't just say, I'm sick in the morning and I'm not sick in the afternoon. And then as far as there's a question on, should you still be withholding for IRA or 401k? Yeah. The question may be relating to jumping into personally, I'm not sure, Beth, you might need to expand on this for me. So required minimum distributions have been lifted this year. You don't have to take one at all. And if you take money out of an IRA or a 401k, it is taxable, but there's no penalty this year, and you can repay the tax on that over the next 3 years. But beware, it is almost guaranteed that taxes will be going up in the future. So postponing paying tax on that till 2021, 2022, you may be paying at a higher rate, even though you didn't have the 10% penalty for early withdrawal. So just a word of caution there. All right, I'm going to jump over to my chat real quick and see what I have going on there. So that's do that and look at chat. Okay. All right. So I do have a question with somebody asked, where can all these previous videos be? Where are they located? They're actually on my YouTube channel. So I can jump up here. I'm going to share this real quick so that you can see it. So if you just go, and I also send all the recordings I send out, they come out about 24 hours after. So I have a YouTube channel and I have put all of my recordings and including my Q&As up here. See if it will let me go to it. Come on, there we go. All right. All right, so when you come in here and you can see what I have in here. I've got all three. This will be the third one. It'll go up tomorrow. I've got my Q&As, and like I said, I also send those out. So if you ever need to see those, that's where they are. All right, and I'm going to go back to my other share here. So what I wanted to do next, let me see if I can share that, is I'm going to, yeah, I've gotten into this mode. This is my third week in a row. Some of you, you've been on here every week with me, and I appreciate it so much. I wanted to ask you what else you want to learn from me. Presumably, we will not be living in a COVID-19 environment for the rest of this year. So I would love to hear from you on what else you would like to learn. And I've put up some topics here. And if there's something that I've not listed, go ahead and put it in the chat or in the Q&A as far as what topics you'd be interested in. I've listed things like QuickBooks as far as, you know, I used to do a QuickBooks user group. I still love teaching QuickBooks, and we both teach on QuickBooks Online and QuickBooks Desktop. Second one is financial literacy and how to know your numbers, which has come into play quite a bit right now, as far as, do you understand all the numbers that are on your financials? The other one would be business leadership and mindset. Things like talking about things like pivoting and purging and pausing things in your business, or how to interact with, how to be a good manager, how to, all these things. Or then a series on how, you know, how to do bookkeeping, how to go paperless, how to process payroll, how, you know, you know, if you want more of a tutorial situation of, you let me teach you what I've done in building my business, I would be happy to teach on topics like that as well. So yeah, there's, or like I said, type into to the chat or into the Q&A window, and that way I can just, it can kind of guide me as to what other things you'd like to hear about. This has always been my passion, is to come through and teach, and that's why I have created WLX, which is Whitworth Learning Experience, that I have been working on launching for the last few months, and gotten slowed down again by circumstances currently, but I'm ready to continue. So I'm going to close this in another 10 seconds. So if anybody still wants to vote, I'd appreciate it. And I'm going to end that. Okay. And so some of these have been interesting to me in that I'm learning the technology behind so much of this. So that, if that could be another topic, if you're interested in learning some of this, the technology. So as always, I have the links to the reliable resources on the last slide. So feel free to, when I send out the slide deck, you've got those websites handy. And then finally, the ways to stay connected. Like us on Facebook. We are we're out there. We're streaming live over there today. Yay, I got that to work. Join my WLX co-mailing list if you're interested in more learning opportunities. And then, as always, our website is up. We have a newsletter. That's where you're going to access things to make appointments. Right now, all of our appointments are virtual, but then also our latest newsletters are there. So, all right, everybody. I am so glad you shared your Well, I guess your after lunch hour could be some people's lunch hour with me. I hope everybody has a really nice weekend and a happy Easter and is stay safe and healthy over this weekend. And